Please be seated. It's been a bad week for Ferguson Police Chief Tom Jackson. He is the sixth city official to resign following the Justice Department report, which found consistent patterns of racial bias in the department. Overnight, Jackson said, I went from being a small-town police chief to being a part of a conversation about racism, equality, and the role of the police. I want to be a part of that conversation and part of the solution. The mayor of Ferguson called Jackson an honorable man whose decision came after a lot of soul searching. But 30-plus years of service, with a work history that includes numerous awards, even recognition from the White House, could not shield Jackson from becoming the target since the fatal shooting of Michael Brown last August of bitter complaints. His pending departure has not stopped the torrents of criticism. He should have left sooner. He should have done more. He's made a total mess of things. Jackson did apologize to the parents of Michael Brown, but according to his detractors, he waited too long. The apology was lame. He should have done so in person, not in a video, for crying out loud. I'm not here to make a judgment about Tom Jackson, and this is not a sermon about events in Ferguson, Missouri. I'm reminding you of these things which you already know because complaint is such a prominent feature of our public discourse. According to Will Bowen, author of A Complaint-Free World, How to Stop Complaining and Start Enjoying the Life You Always Wanted, the average person complains between 15 and 30 times every day. Bowen believes that a complaint-free world would be nothing less than paradise and has been on a mission since the publication of his book to get 1% of the entire population of the world to commit to living complaint-free lives. If we all stopped complaining, he asserts, war would not even be possible. Of course, complaining is as old as the hills. The ancient Israelites wandering around in the wilderness 3,500 years ago were experts. It seems to be a hardwired response to grievance, whether real or imagined, and we learn it early. Is there a parent in this room who hasn't been driven to the brink by your kids' complaints? You won't let me do anything. I hate broccoli. I'm never going to use this stupid algebra. You are so mean. It's easy to understand Moses, who, upon catching the Israelites dancing around a golden calf, smashed the 10 Commandments at the foot of Mount Sinai. He'd caught them in a blatant display of their dissatisfaction with his leadership, and he had had enough. In between that famous episode back in Exodus and today's lesson from Numbers, God has given Moses a brand new set of tablets, but the ornery Israelites have not given up their old habits. Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we detest this miserable food. Had I been there, I might have pointed out the inconsistency of their complaints. Miserable food or no food? Which is it? But never mind. And never mind that God had freed the people from slavery, enriched them with Egyptian gold, parted the Red Sea to ensure their escape from Pharaoh's army, provided them with manna and quail, and defeated their enemies. Never mind that Moses had wrangled with Pharaoh, called down the plagues, led them through the desert, and with more patience than Job, pleaded with God not to destroy them. It seems to be, from the Israelites' point of view anyway, a clear case of what have you, God, done for us lately. Maybe if they had simply trusted more, maybe if they had maintained a stiff upper lip when the going got tough out there in the wilderness, maybe they would have been better off. Maybe they would have gotten to the promised land sooner if they had kept gratitude journals instead of grousing all the time. But I have to wonder if a complaint-free world would really be paradise. I don't doubt that the world would be a better place if we all learned to button our lips and give our run-of-the-mill grumblings a rest. And I am absolutely certain that I would be an easier human being to be around if I didn't fill up my 15 to 30 complaint quota every day. But there is another side to the biblical tradition of complaint. Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann asserts that the very character and nature of God is primarily and intrinsically dialogical, which is a scholar's rather obtuse way of saying that before we can say anything else about God, we must affirm that God is fundamentally and essentially relational. This divine quality gets expressed in the old stories through the covenant relationship established by God with the people of Israel. You, God speaks to them, you will be my people, and I will be your God. A covenant, of course, is not just a contract defining the legal terms of a relationship. A covenant opens the way for us to imagine a God whose nature it is to love lavishly and who desires, as all lovers do, a response in kind. This is no mushy, sentimental love. Rather, it is a fierce, tender, John 3:16 love. A God so loved the world that he gave everything love. Which, by the way, was never, ever intended to frighten us into believing the correct things about Jesus. And it was never, ever intended to justify drawing lines between who's saved and who isn't. Rather, given away as pure, no strings attached gift. Covenant opens the way to imagine a God who, as Brueggemann puts it, initiates conversation, invites response, and then does not dictate what kind of response we must make. Sometimes, on our good days perhaps, that response is praise and thanksgiving. But a covenant also allows, and this is my point, for lament and complaint. This is, again, according to Brueggemann, the pathos of God. Intimately and unavoidably involved in the messy, complicated lives of creatures, even when, and especially when, that engagement means suffering. The appropriate response to the pain of the world, then, begins in complaint. A crying out for justice, an insistence that the world be put right. Whether on a bridge in Selma, Alabama, or in the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, or anywhere else that anguished people throughout the ages have expressed their longing for the fulfillment of life's promise. Complaint can be a good, even a holy thing. A sacrament of discontent, if you will. Do protectors of the status quo like it? Of course not. Is it comfortable for any of us? No. Does it make us afraid? Sometimes. Is it necessary? I believe it is. Phyllis Tickle, when questioned on this point in an interview, said, "I think it's always right to rage. Not to rage is to be Pollyanna and die of sweetness." Heaven forbid. We'd rather have a complaint-free world. Another way to put it would be that we'd rather skip the cross and go straight to Easter. God's answer to the complaining Israelites was to send snakes as punishment. But then the people were instructed to look up at the bronze serpent Moses held before them. Now, this is one weird story, I'll allow you. But the message seems to be that healing comes when we are willing to look at and deal with the inescapable reality of suffering. And so the best sermon today would be for all of us to sit in silence and look up at the cross, to contemplate a God so invested in the world that God entered freely, sacrificially into the world's suffering. The cross means many things to many people. But one thing it means to me is that through the power of the relationship with God, in whatever way we understand God, we can make a way out of no way. It takes a lifetime to learn to trust this much, which is why perhaps the Israelites had to wander around in the wilderness for the span of a life. It takes a lifetime to grow up, to accept responsibility, to trust God's love with a radical trust. But when we do, if we do, we will experience a fullness not available to us in any other way. What God did for the Israelites, God is always doing for God's people, leading us toward possibilities limited only by the restrictions on our imaginations, self-imposed. It is not comfortable and there are no guarantees, but the invitation is always there. As we draw near to the final drama of Lent, may we open ourselves to the cries, to the complaints of people everywhere who suffer. Amen.